Hey, what's up, everybody? You know what time it is. Your boy Jeffrey L. Boney. I'm back. That's right, I'm back, y'all. I know y'all been fiending, scratching like a dope fiend, wanting to see Jeffrey L. Boney, Real Talk Junkies. But we're back, y'all. 2022 is upon us. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy Black History Month, man. It's about to be on and popping. I want everybody, and I mean everybody, to share the link. Let everybody know that Real Talk Junkies is live. I have a great show today, as always. And of course, my guest is no exception. I mean, considering this Black History Month, I find it better to have as a guest as the person I'm going to have on today. But we'll get into that. This week marks the beginning of Black History Month right here in these United States. And as we celebrate Black History Month every year, I can't help but be reminded about how and why it began. And yes, I know some conspiracy theorists out there. I know February is the shortest month of the year, and I know you feel like whoever they is, gave us the shortest month of the year to celebrate Black History Month. But listen, let me just say this. First of all, I want you to know that you don't have to wait until February to celebrate Black History Month, as you can celebrate it all year round, 365, 24/7. Next, I'm going to also need you to pump your brakes a little bit and listen to me as I give you a brief history lesson on why we celebrate Black History Month every year. I, for one, can truly appreciate the foundational roots of Black History Month, and that one of my historical heroes, an all-around favorite African-American author, and of course, he's my Omega Psi Phi fraternity brother, was responsible for its inception. In 1926, Carter G. Woodson pioneered the celebration of Negro History Week. And after Negro History Week became widely accepted, it was extended to a full month, to which we now celebrate it as Black History Month. Carter G. Woodson originally designated Negro History Week for the second week in February to coincide with two birthdays: the marking of the birthday of the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, and 19th century African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Every day, y'all, again, is Black History. And we can also appreciate Black history with the people that we have before us. My guest today is the epitome of Black history in America. Dr. Benjamin Franklin Chavis Jr. is an African-American civil rights leader and the current president of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. But he's way more important than that, y'all. He is extremely important to the civil rights movement in so many ways in Black history, and we're going to get into that on today. I want to introduce to all Dr. Benjamin Chavis.
I'm glad to be with you.
All right, man. Well, I know you flew all the way in from DC to be with us today, and so we appreciate that. Let's just jump right into it. Let's start from the beginning. We're talking about Black History Month. Your entire family is rooted in Black history. It's not just you. I mean, we're going to get into you, right, but your whole family. And let's just start with, your grandfather, John Chavis.
All right. Well, first, Jeff Boney, let me say that I'm honored to be in your presence. I think the best way to celebrate Black history is to make some more history.
Yes.
And real
talk junkies,
real talk junkies is making history.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm pleased to be here. But let me just get to your question. Whenever I'm asked about my family, I think about the nexus between the Black church, the Black press, and the Black family. Mm. When you talk about my family, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was the Reverend John Chavis, a minister, first brother to be ordained as a Presbyterian minister in the United States, first brother that had the opportunity to go to Princeton. It was called Princeton Seminary back in those days. Then it became Princeton University. This is in the 1700s.
Wow.
And so John Chavis was born in 1763. He fought in the Revolutionary War. Against the British. One of the parts of Black history that we don't focus enough is that when the 13 colonists fought against the British, there were a lot of African Americans that fought against the British. Everybody knows about Sappers. Attups been the first person to be killed in the Revolutionary War up in Boston, but they don't talk about the others that were killed in New York and Virginia and Maryland and the Carolinas, fighting against the British. And why would they fight against the British? Because they were landowners. Yeah. All Africans in the 1700s were not slaves. some of them were former slaves, and some of them through manumission bought themselves out of slavery and acquired land, a lot of land.
Mm-hmm.
So my great grandparents, yeah, they were slaves, but my great grandfather was actually born free because his parents, who were former slaves, had became free and landowners.
Yes.
And that's how he was able to matriculate to a place called Princeton, New Jersey, to get a higher education. He was ordained in the Presbyterian Church in Virginia, and his first assignment was in North Carolina. It was called the Orange County Presbytery.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Orange County, North Carolina today, that's where the University of North Carolina is.
And this is after he went to Princeton.
Yes.
Yeah, and he was the first African American to actually graduate.
That's right.
From Princeton University.
Yes, and the first to be ordained as a Presbyterian minister. So when you talk about me being in the civil rights movement or being a freedom fighter or being in the freedom movement, I was born into a family that had long roots in the movement.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we should learn from our history.
Mm-hmm.
And part of learning from the history is that we have to know the history. And I was blessed. I feel blessed to have been born in a family that I remember when I was 3 or 4 years old and listening to my parents talk about things. You know, I knew what racial injustice was before going to the first grade. I knew what racism was before going to the first grade. I was educated in a segregated school system. And Jeff, I first learned how to read. Even though it was a segregated school system, the white power structure dictated what books that we could learn from, even in a segregated system, to be accredited, so-called accreditation.
Yeah, right.
You know, who accredits you and for
Right.
what reason is there accreditation?
Right. Kind of like this critical race theory
Right,
thing going on
exactly.
right now, but that's a whole nother conversation. We get in there.
So the first book I learned how to read was entitled Sambo.
Sambo.
And it was about a caricature of a black dummy.
Wow.
Who had extremely big lips, extremely wide nose, a red, scarlet red tongue that always hung out his mouth. And all Sambo did was ate pancakes. And when he eat pancakes, the syrup would drip down his face and onto his clothes. And now I'm in the first grade trying to learn how to read. And this is the image that's been fed to my mind. And so I would get that in the first grade and then go home and say, Mom, Dad, what? Why are they they want me to be like Sambo? You know? And thank God I had parents, because education begins at home.
Yes, it does.
So I'm going to talk about the black family, the black church, and the black press.
Yes.
You know, and so I grew up in a family and in a community. I never knew I never sat next to a white person in classroom to my sophomore year in college. I didn't, you know, I knew there were white people, but I didn't have no interaction with them.
Yeah.
Because in segregation, we had our own businesses. We had our own barbershops, our own beauty parlors. We had our own butcher. We had our own florist. Where everything we needed, we had. Right. And if you didn't have, you grew it. Yeah. To learn how to grow things agriculturally. And people in the community, in my community where I grew up in Oxford, North Carolina, nobody even locked their doors because it was community.
Yeah.
And if my family ran out of sugar, I could go to the next door, get some sugar out of the neighbor's pantry and leave a note, I got some sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And then they could come on my house if we got some onions or potatoes or something, they could come get it. But you let your neighbor go in your house.
It's going down.
What has happened to? Right. Because you can't have a community if you don't have a family.
Yeah.
So you got our families need to be reconstituted, and our whole concept of family. Like all the children in my community, we were all brothers and sisters. Yeah, I had my own blood brothers and sisters, but I had many brothers and sisters, and I would play marbles. You know. Well, I wanted to make sure everybody had some marbles.
Yeah.
Even though I was a pretty good marble player. You know, I didn't want to shoot all the marbles and I go home with all the marbles.
Yeah.
I want all my partners to have some marbles.
Yeah, you wasn't gangster like that.
So what I'm saying is I learned this concept of communal consciousness, family consciousness. And this is in the first, second grade.
Yes.
So my parents also taught at an orphanage. So from the first grade to the seventh grade, I went to school with black orphans.
Wow.
It was called the North Carolina Colored Orphanage. There were 2 orphanages in Oxford, even to this day. One for whites, one for blacks. I'm talking about even in 2022. There's still 2 orphanages, one for black whites. The white orphanage is like a college campus. You know, school of printing, school of agriculture, and a campus. But the black orphanage barely had dormitories. And in the summer months, when it was warm, the office couldn't afford shoes, so everybody went barefooted. So I had shoes. There's no way in the world I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna put shoes on my feet, and my partners in school don't have none. So one of the reasons why I wear a size 12, 13 now, because I went barefooted for 4 or 5 months out of the year.
Yeah.
Out of solidarity. So I learned something about being concerned about those around you who may have less than what you have.
Yeah. Before you go on with that, I want to go back to your great grandfather,
John Chavis, the Reverend John Chavis.
I want to get as many greats in as I need
That's
to.
okay. That's good.
He also founded or started an underground school
Yes.
to teach blacks who couldn't or were forbidden from reading and writing.
Well, keep in mind there was something that happened in the early 1830s called there was a slave insurrection, and after the Nat Turner slave insurrection in 1833 in Southern Virginia, Oxford is near the Virginia border, my hometown, tobacco plantation town. And so after the Nat Turner insurrection, the state of North Carolina, the state of Virginia, the state of South Carolina, the state of Georgia passed a law, Alabama also, making it a felony to teach blacks how to read and write. And this is before the Civil War. So, legislation, state legislation, in Texas,
exactly.
State legislation.
Right. I just want to make sure.
Suppression just didn't start a few years ago.
Right.
So what happened was my great-great-great-grandfather, John Chavis, was an educated guy. He had a school in Raleigh, the state capital. But after they passed that legislation, only whites could attend his school. So he was teaching white students in Raleigh by day, and then at night, late night, because there was no cars, it was horse and buggy days. He would get his horse and buggy and go 40 miles back to Oxford, to Graham County, a place called Satterwhite section of Graham County, and set up an underground school for black kids that were still enslaved.
Wow.
And to make a long story short, and we could do a whole program just on John Chavis.
Yeah.
But a group of white supremacists one day decided that they were going to take his life for teaching black kids how to read and write. And he was in his horse and buggy, and they got my grandfather, they beat him to death, and they cut the head off his horse and delivered the head of the horse to my great-great-great-grandmother, John Chavis's wife. They did not give Mrs. Chavis the body of John Chavis. And so for decades, for over a century, we've been looking for the grave of John Chavis. My sister, who recently passed on January the 1st this year, Dr. Helen Chavis, author, found the grave site. She wrote a book about John Chavis. I would commend it. If you go to Amazon, it's online. It's called John Chavis, Patriot. So I grew up not only knowing about my great-great-great-grandfather, but all of the 6 generations leading up to when I was born. And so for me, I had no choice. I had to be in the movement. In fact, I wanted to hurry up and grow up. And by the time I was 12, 11, I thought I was grown.
Wow.
But I have to give my parents credit. When they bought me my NAACP membership card when I was 12 years old, man, I had a I was a card-carrying member of the NAACP.
Yeah.
I thought that was
It meant a lot to be a member of NAACP then.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it meant so much. Most black people who are members would hide their membership card.
Why?
Because if you get stopped by the police and they see you have a membership card in the South, like the NAACP was outlawed in Alabama and Mississippi. Outlawed.
Legislation.
That's right.
That's what to keep
It was considered a subversive organization.
Wow.
Trying to get black people together. So I felt by the time I was 12, and incidentally, I started writing for the Carolina Times when I was 11 years old. My parents were also writers and teachers, and so I learned the importance of reading, the importance of writing, but most of all, I learned the importance of self-expression, how to express yourself. Poetry, writing. I became the editor of my high school newspaper, the Mariposa Gazette. I mean, I was writing editorials against the Vietnam War in the 1960s.
Wow.
When the war first started. So a lot of my classmates
in high school.
A lot of my classmates were taken out of high school and forced to go into the military. Same thing, they wanted to go to college, couldn't go to college. So there were a lot of contradictions. So I'm going to go back, though, to 1955, the murder of Emmett Till. Remember, I'm talking about black church, black press, black family. The murder of Emmett Till in 1955 in Money, Mississippi. Young brothers from Chicago went down to Money, Mississippi. This white woman alleged that he had whistled at her or winked at her, something the wrong way. He was beaten to death, brutally lynched, and murdered, body all mutilated. His mother was named Mrs. Mamie Mobley. She went from Chicago to get her son. They were trying to bury her son in Mississippi. She said, "Oh no, you're not gonna bury my. I want the world to see what happened to my son Emmett Till." She brought him back to Chicago. Now here's the connexus. She put his body in a black church. People were lining up from blocks to come to see the guys. Jet Magazine, one of our black publications, and the Chicago Defender, one of our black publications, put the picture of Emmett Till's battered, brutalized face on the cover. I remember seeing that cover of Jet Magazine in 1955. Now, I was born in 1948, so I'm only 7 years old. And all parents, this is where family come in. Whether you're in Mississippi, whether you're in Alabama, or whether you're in the Carolinas, most of our parents, and even my own parents, they wouldn't let me out of the house. I couldn't even play in my front yard because all mothers were scared that something was going to similar happen to their children. So I had this pent-up anger. I didn't like what happened to Emmett Till.
Yeah.
But I thank God that the black press had the courage to put that picture out there. We're oral people, but we're also visual people. The visual images, not just as our suffering, but what we do about our suffering. Those visual images are so important because our culture speaks to our resistance to oppression. Our culture speaks to our defiance of all the bad legislation that's passed against our interests. Yeah, that may be the law, but we don't have to follow that law if that law is not morally right.
I want to pause there for a second. When you talk about defiance and moral defiance, and you growing up in this environment and having this in your blood, I'm reminded about your history as well. Being when we're talking about Black history, where you fought against the system in the library,
yes,
and how. You were the first African American to receive a library card.
A library card in my hometown, Oxford, North Carolina.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was 12 years old. I went to church that Sunday. This happened on Monday. I heard the preacher talk about we're all born in the image of God, the imago Dei, which is called. Everybody's supposed to be born in the image of God. If everybody's born in the image of God, everybody should be treated equally and fairly. And they just built this brand new library in my downtown Oxford. And yet, no black folks will go in the library. There was no sign on there saying white only, but everybody knew in the mindset, you can't go into that library. And I said, well, I need a book, man, with both covers on it. Because in the segregated school system, most of the books that we had in public schools, even the Sambo book, were hand-me-down books from the white school system. You could always, you open the book, you see people sign their names, who owned the book for you. It would always filled up. I never, my first through the seventh grade saw a book with a new book. And they have just built this new library. So, I need to get a book with both covers on. So I thought about what the preacher had said. I knew about my family history. I said, and the last thing I didn't want to get my mother and father in trouble because they were school teachers. Mm-hmm. They could have got fired for what I did. Mm-hmm. So I went in the library, the elderly white woman said, son.
12 years old.
Yeah. She said, you're in the wrong place. You're supposed to be in the Colored Annex. The Colored Annex was a building next to the First Baptist Church, the Black Baptist Church, where they had a house. And that was where they had, magazines and other old books, nothing current, mainly, in my view. Yeah. So I said, no, ma'am, I'm going to get one of these books. I need a new book. She said, well, you can't get a book without a library card. I said, I understand. What do I have to do to get a library card? She said, well, look, I have to call the police because you're in the wrong place. I said, well, I call the police. I'm not leaving until I get a library card. And
you're 12 years old.
Yeah, I'm 12 years old. And I'm walking home from school. So all my classmates, they're looking in the glass. They say, oh, they know Ben's going to go to jail. Yeah. So they called my parents. And one of the best days of my life, and this is why family is so important. My parents did not snatch me out of the library and spank me for breaking up. They stood with me.
Wow.
I got that library card.
Yes.
And all my little partners, they came in and got that library card. So that night, I couldn't even sleep. I got rested. I said, that's all we got to do is stand up to injustice.
Wow. That's
all you got to do is make the request. I made me a little list. The movies, the dime store. You don't want a little bit of freedom. So that taught me a lesson. You have to challenge injustice. Yeah. And so growing up, I'm 12. So by the time I'm 14 now, I'm working actually with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I became the youth coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was the Black church, the Black family, and the Black press. That nexus. That's how SCLC got started.
How did that connection happen with you and Dr. King?
Golden Franks was the state field coordinator in North Carolina. And he had heard about what I was doing in Oxford, who was this young man writing for the Carolina Times over in Durham. And, I was writing about freedom. I was writing about student protests. The student sit-ins started in 1960 in Greensboro, college students at A&T, HBCU. So I was active, I even put my age up. I was 14 years old. I was driving. Oh, wow. I put my age, so I had mobility. So Golden Franks asked me if I would be the statewide youth coordinator for SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so when Dr. King would come to Raleigh, Shaw University, where SNCC was formed, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I would always go over. And, I was always impressed with Dr. King. And I'm a young, student, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds. So I learned how to organize at a very early age. I learned how to mobilize. But I also learned the importance of preparation. You just don't jump out here and lead a demonstration. There are certain basic elements to organizing and mobilizing. And you know what, Jeff? I became a better student in school because everything I was learning in the classroom had immediate application to what was going on in the community, to what was going on in the movement. And then the press was able to, the Black press in particular, was able to connect these dots. All of a sudden, I'm in Oxford, but I'm identifying what's going on in Montgomery, Alabama. I'm identifying what's going on in Selma. I'm identifying what's going on in Chicago. I'm identifying what's going on in New York. I never had gone to those cities, but through the Black press, I was able to connect to what was going on into those cities. So to me, even today, the Black press has the ability to provide a wider perspective. Like Houston. There's something going on in Houston right now that's also going on in Los Angeles. That's also going on in Jackson, Mississippi. That's also going on in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Richmond, Virginia, or Baltimore, Maryland, or even Washington, D.C. And the thing is, how do we make these connections? And how we stay aware. Our awareness, our consciousness is so important. And I became very interested in science. in high school. But I knew I was going to college to be a chemist. I wanted to be a physician. My sister was 1 year younger than me. She also was a chemistry major. She wanted to be a physician. But I got so wrapped up into the civil rights movement, following Dr. King, and even by the time I was in college, I finished my chemistry degree, but I went back because after Dr. King was killed in '68, and keep in mind, I'm on Dr. King's staff from 1963 to 1968. That's 5 years. So I had 5 years of mentorship, learning how to organize, learning how to mobilize, learning how to get the Black church back on the front line of the struggle. That's what the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was. Preachers, not just Baptists. It was Church of God in Christ. It was United Methodist. It was Episcopalian. It was Baptist. It was Holiness. It was independent churches. And we even had some Muslim brothers and sisters, and there were some Black Jews back in those days. We had everybody in the movement because it wasn't necessarily your denomination that mattered. What mattered was your faith.
Yes,
faith matters. I believe when I went in that library, I went on faith.
Yes.
I just heard the preacher say that we were all created in the same image. We all,
right.
Created in the image of God. And that's true. I believe the preacher.
Yeah. That was your marching order.
That's right. I said, look, I'm not going to accept what these imperfect human beings in terms of white supremacy are putting out, calling us inferior.
Yeah.
You can't accept somebody trying to put you in a jacket.
Come on.
Somebody trying to put you in a cage.
Yeah.
Sometimes somebody try to put you down. You got to lift yourself up.
Yeah.
I learned that. And I quite frankly, that's still what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
In 2022.
I got you. So let's get into what ended up happening as you got actively more involved in the civil rights movement. You were sent down back to Wilmington, North Carolina,
by my church,
by the church that you were a part of,
United Church of Christ,
racial equity group.
Yes.
And the United Church of Christ sent you down. You were 23.
I was 23 years old to Wilmington, North Carolina.
And when you went down there, for the purpose of
school desegregation,
desegregating the schools.
Education keep in mind, the United States Supreme Court in 1954 said that separate and unequal schools based on race was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
1954.
Yeah.
So fast forward 20 some years later, the schools are still segregated.
Right.
And particularly in Wilmington, North Carolina. Right.
So you went down there, the church sent you down there,
right.
23 years of age, in 1971.
1971, February 1st, 1971. Black History Month.
Yeah, Black History Month.
That's right.
So you're down there, you're fighting to desegregate the public school system.
Right. And there's one particular student that I was fighting for. He was in junior high school. You might know his name. He was a pretty good basketball player. His name was Michael Jordan.
Wow.
He was from Wilmington, North Carolina. He was in junior high school. He was one of the Black students that we were fighting to get the right to have an education so he could go on to UNC, where he became who he is, and then to the Chicago Bulls.
So 1971, February 1, you're down there to fight to desegregate these public schools. And a year later,
yes,
you get charged. You and 10 other individuals, known as now, you and 9 others, known as the Wilmington 10, were charged with a false charge of arson.
But actually 3 charges: false charge of arson, false charge of conspiracy, and false charge of assaulting police and firemen.
So talk about that.
Well,
a lot of people don't know about that. They may hear Wilmington 10, but not really know.
Well, we were political prisoners. What I mean by that is that we were not guilty of any crime. The system decided to punish us to try to stop the movement. Keep in mind, 1971 is 3 years after Dr. King was killed. So some of us in the late 1960s, after Dr. King was killed, going into the 1970s, we had to keep this movement alive. We can't let the assassination of Dr. King assassinate the movement. You can kill our leader, but you're not going to kill the movement. In fact, we have to replenish ourselves. We have to spread out. So never again will allow the mantle only to fall on one person's shoulder. That was our thinking. That was our conduct. Plus, also, this is the rise of Black power. This is the rise of Pan-Africanism. This is the rise of us getting a better consciousness. Same thing in the early 1970s. You have all these liberation movements going on in Africa against colonialism, against imperialism. And we were making connections. Even though, yes, I was struggling against racial discrimination, in the school system in Wilmington, North Carolina, 1971, but we were connecting to a global movement against oppression of people of color, particular oppression of African people.
Yeah.
And by that time, keep in mind, from 12 years old to 23 years old, I'm an 11-year veteran now of the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
Even though people say, only 23. Yeah, I was 23, but I was very versed when the United Church of Christ Commission just sent me to Wilmington. I knew how to organize.
Absolutely.
And in a short few days in a week, I had a movement.
Yeah.
And our movement grew, and that's why this criminal justice system came out against us. They falsely accused us, falsely charged us of a riot that took place in 1971. A year later, in 1972, they arrested us first, then they tried and convicted us unjustly, and we were sentenced to a combined total, all 10 of us, to 282 years in prison.
And you got the most, 25 years?
I had the longest sentence, 34 years.
34 years.
I had a 34-year sentence.
Wow.
At 23, I was facing that kind of time. And
was there any moments where you were asked to take a plea deal or?
Oh yeah, they always want us to plead. We said, no, I'm not pleading to something I'm not guilty of. No.
Yeah.
And see, I was a veteran. I have to give credit to the other members of the Wilmington 10 because I was 23. 8 of the Wilmington 10 were only 16, 17, 18 years old. They were high school student leaders. That's why they were picked out, because of their leadership. And I have to give these young brothers credit, man. They stood firm. And this is the first time they had ever been arrested. I had been arrested. By the time I was 23, I probably had been arrested about 40 times.
You
know,
because of the civil rights movement.
Yeah. I mean, because that's
you was as they call you, a thug. But you was a civil rights thug.
Exactly. No, people say, "Well, you've been arrested." Dr. King was arrested many times.
Yes.
His most famous writing was not his "I Have a Dream" speech.
It was
a great speech. It was a letter from the Birmingham jail. Yeah. And his letter from the Birmingham jail had a critique of why the black church was getting a little silent. The black church should always be outspoken. The black press should always be outspoken. Our black families should always be outspoken. Don't wait till a tragedy hits your family. Be outspoken to prevent the tragedy from hitting your family.
Yeah. So you got arrested. What was going through your mind at this time that you now realize you've been sentenced?
I became a political prisoner pastor because I was also concerned about my co-defendants. I had to make sure that they could be prepared psychologically, because when the judge lined us up, gave out 28 years, 24 years, 26 years, 22 years,
Jesus,
34 years.
Jesus.
We sat up there, and as he was giving out the time, they putting shackles around our ankles, around our waist. I mean, chains.
Wow. So you
So it was a heavy burden.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to catch my breath there.
No, you good. Take your time.
I'm trying to not just remember, but recapture the moment to answer your question. So I knew, one, we had to keep our faith in God. I knew we had to keep our faith in one another. We became comrades, and I had to look after them. I'm gonna be very honest on film to you. My church denomination, they were gonna pay my legal fees because they sent me there. But they were a little hesitant at first to pay the legal fees of my co-defendants. And I said, my lawyer is gonna represent all 10. Whatever happens to me, happens to them. And if it doesn't happen for them, it's not gonna happen for me.
Wow.
And that's how we became solidarity. Unity was very important. And of course, in the early days of our incarceration, they spread us out into 10 different prisons because they were trying to divide us. And the police would go to them and say, "Oh, we only have to Chavis and them. If you turn state evidence, we'll let you out." None of them did that, man.
Wow.
I was so proud.
They stayed true.
Of my co-defendants staying true.
So you served, 10 years?
No, not quite 10 years. Most of the 1970s. First, they put us in prison even before we were convicted. They're called safekeeping. We were arrested in March of 1972. Our first trial didn't happen to June. So from March to June, they not just kept us in the county jail, they shipped us to the prison even before we were convicted of anything. And so we spent months in prison prior to our eventual conviction. And then after conviction, they sent us back to prison, to different prisons. And in the end of 1972, when I was in Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is a 100-year-old prison that was built by slaves before the Civil War. That prison is still downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. It's called Central Prison. While I was there in December of 1972, they burned a brother alive. His name is John Catino. He was one of the black leaders of the inmates. And of course, be very honest, the Wilmington 10, we were portrayed in the mainstream media like the baddest gangsters in the world. Although we were nonviolent civil rights workers. But in the prison system, all the brothers knew, all the old timers, I had a lot of protection.
A lot of love.
That's right. I became acquainted with something called the conduct, the conduct code of an inmate.
Okay.
Prison's code.
Yeah.
There were other words for it, but I'll say that way. But the thing is, during my first 4 months in prison, I couldn't go to the shower. I had to stay in my cell because they had, the white supremacists had also people in prison, and they were going to stab me. I knew who had the knife. I knew what they were going to do, and the black prison guards helped protect me.
Wow.
So that's why, I tell brothers and sisters all the time, it's not your uniform that you wear. You can be a cop, you can be a correctional officer, you can be on stage saying hip hop. It's not your dress, it's what's in your heart, it's what's in your mind.
Yeah.
And I have to give credit to those black correctional officers. They could have stood back and let me be killed, but they didn't, because they knew that we shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah.
And even today, I do a lot of work on prison reform, criminal justice reform, because there are a lot of brothers and sisters, black women also, languishing in prison, who never should be locked up in the first place. First, who never should be charged with crime.
Yeah.
There are many brothers and sisters in prison who committed no criminal act, who languish in prison, one, because they're poor, can't have a lawyer, and the people who are paid to represent them sometimes misrepresent them. A lot of things happen. But family is important. My family stuck with me, and the other family members of the Wilmington 10 stuck with us. So to answer your question, I spent a total of almost 6.5 years in prison during the 1970s. But during the time I wasn't in prison, we were fighting the court charges. It took 10 years for us to overturn our convictions. We had great lawyers, black lawyers. And on December the 4th, 1980, the convictions of the Wilmington 10 were overturned by the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. But the problem is, when you have a conviction overturned, the state has the right to retry you. So it took another 30 years from 1980 to 2012 for us to get a pardon of innocence. So the whole struggle of the Wilmington 10 took 40 years for us to get our names
clear your name.
cleared. Right. On December the 31st, 2012, the first female governor of North Carolina, a Democrat, Beverly Perdue, gave us a pardon of innocence. And that's very important. It wasn't a pardon of forgiveness, it was a pardon of innocence, where the state said on the record, the Wilmington should have never been arrested in the first place.
Yeah.
And the governor's quote was, "This is a case of, quote, naked racism," unquote.
Wow. So you get out of prison, it's in the 80s.
Yes.
And you start back into civil rights.
I'm fired up. I had a big afro. I'm wearing dashikis. I'm ready to get back into
back in the fight.
That's right.
So what did you do out the gate? What was some of the first days?
Well, out of the gate, keep in mind, I started out as the Southern organizer of the United Church. After Dr. King was killed, I went from Southern Christian Conference to the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. And I started as a Southern organizer. I kept being elevated. Then I became the Washington, D.C. director of the Commission for Racial Justice. Then I became the deputy director. And in 1985, I became the president and CEO of the United Church of Christ Commission, which was a church civil rights organization. And just back up, in 1982, that's when I coined the term environmental racism. Because my home, what's going on in my home state? Everything happens in North Carolina now. In 1982, there are 100 counties in North Carolina. The most predominant black county in North Carolina is called Warren County, W-A-R-R-E-N. Somebody came from the Northeast and dumped several tanker trucks of PCB, polychlorinated biphenyl. It's a cancer-causing subject. You know, my chemistry background, I knew what PCB was. And it comes from transformers. When an electrical company or utilities have to replace their transformer, there's a liquid inside those transformers. That's what PCB is, polychlorinated biphenyls. And they have to dispose of these, they're supposed to dispose of these chemicals
in a landfill or something.
Right.
Something like that.
But they dumped it on the side of the highway in North Carolina.
Man.
So the governor of North Carolina scoops up, and by this time, what started out as some liquid now is in the soil. So now you have 400 tons of PCB laden soil that has to be scooped up. And so after they scoop it up, the government said, well, what is the state of North Carolina going to do with 400 tons of PCB laden soil? You know what the governor decided? We're going to dump it in Warren County. And Lord knows, I'm in New York. So Lord, the last thing I want to do is go get arrested again. I just got out, the room to 10. Right. But I had do the cause.
Yeah, he was down.
So I went down to North Carolina. We started protesting. 500 people arrested, including myself. Reverend Joe Lauer, he was the head of SCLC. He was arrested. Reverend Fontroy was arrested. Reverend Leon White. A lot of us were arrested. But because we were arrested, we'd actually laid down on the highway to keep the trucks from dumping the soil in the landfill in an all-black community outside of Warrenton, North Carolina. And it was when I was arrested, I was in the cell that night in Warren County. That's when I came up. I said, this is racist. This is environmental racism. And I started writing about it. And that's how I coined the term. And out of that protest, later, I'm still over the Commission for Racial Justice. We did the first national study that correlated every zip code in the United States, including the zip codes in Houston, Hawaii, and Alaska, the whole 50 states. We asked, one thing about data, you do research. It's just not crunching numbers. It's what question you ask of the data.
Yes.
Nobody had ever asked, is there a correlation between the racial composition of this zip code and the location of toxic waste facilities and dumps in America? We not only asked the question, we paid a statistician. United Church of Christ put up $100,000 for the research. I took it, I hired some of the best statisticians and researchers who could do the numbers for us. And it was 100% foolproof research. It's called Toxic Waste and Race in America. It is still the landmark research document today that even the Environmental Protection Agency uses today to determine where all these sites are in America. So I'm very proud of that. It's one of the things I did in the United Church of Christ in the 1980s. Yeah. But I was also working with Mandela. Mandela was still in prison. We were trying to get him out of prison. So I did a lot of work in Angola during this time. And one thing leads to another. But I'm also writing. I'm writing now for the Black press. I had a column in all the Black newspapers called Civil Rights Journal. It was not only in newspapers, but it was also in audio. Yeah. Because back in those days, Black radio, block type radio was vibing. And so we not only had a print word, but we had an audio called Civil Rights Journal that was in all of the what came to be Radio 1 stations and some of the Black stations. Unfortunately, today in 2022, Black-owned radio has gone down. We don't have as many stations as we used to own 20 and 30 years ago.
Well, man, there's so much about you, man. We just, scratching the surface, to be honest, about Dr. Benjamin
Well,
Chavis.
you told me you were going to do the show. You may have to do more than one show.
I know, right? Well, I'm just saying, your involvement as the executive director of the NAACP,
right.
Of
that
course.
Came in the 90s. That was a little
then you of course, you and your involvement with making sure that the Million Man March, one of the founding coordinators of that, And then of course, you know, you in your my favorite movie, one of my favorite
Belly.
movies, Belly. You know, so
1999.
so let's talk about NAACP briefly. You know, let's talk about how you know, why you want to get involved in NAACP as executive director.
Well, thank you. Well, keep in mind, I got my membership card when I was 12 years old. I'm still a life member of the NAACP and still do work with them today. But Reginald F. Lewis, the first black billionaire, he approached me in 1993. Actually, in 1992. He asked me if I would consider, because Ben Hooks had announced his retirement, and they were going to search for somebody to lead the NAACP. I was a little reluctant because I had a great job at the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice, you know, almost a lifetime appointment. But Reginald F. Lewis convinced me to run for the position. And one of the things about Reggie, he's a good visionary about what's possible. If what he wanted me to do as head of the NAACP, he was going to make it possible where he was going to pay all the fees to make sure that every black child that graduates from high school will be a registered voter.
Wow.
Then you get your high school diploma, you also get your voters registration. Because he saw back then, this is in 1992, that if we didn't do something to get more of our people to vote, that darker days were coming.
Yes.
Or brighter days were coming. You know, it depends on our level of involvement.
Yes.
It depends on our level of engagement. You know, we determine the future. You know, that's why, to me, Black history is so important. Money is so important because it's not a pause. It's a reflection, but it's also an affirmation. Okay, what we're going to do?
Yeah.
You know, what we're going to do in 2022.
Yeah.
You know, we know what we did in 2021. You know, we know what happened in 2020. And for the Black press, it's 195 years this year.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure, and Karen Carter Richards, our distinguished chair of the NMPA, we've been talking about how to not just reframe the Black press of America, but how to engage the Black church, the Black family, and the Black press.
Right.
To turn things around and not to accept all this voter suppression that's going on in Texas and other places.
Let's go to the audience and see if there's some questions in the audience. Do we have any questions out here that the listeners, the viewers have?
Absolutely, we have some. I've been taking them down. How can we in 2022 strengthen the Black family unit?
Okay, Dr. Chavis, go ahead and take that.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think the Black family unit and Black families can be strengthened first internally. Sometimes I think we wait for the philanthropy outside of our community to solve our problems. I'm in favor of philanthropy, but what is philanthropy given to?
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to control our own narrative. We have to redefine what is the Black family. Because, you know, there's even some debates now during the Black Lives Matter movement. If you look at some of the agendas of some of the Black Lives Matter, there was an argument about what the family was. I mean, a serious argument.
Wow.
At a time we should be unifying. At a time we should be embracing, extending what we mean by family, not excluding.
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting. Corporate Murray is talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. But damn, we need diversity and inclusion inside the Black community.
Hello.
I mean,
Yes,
I'm
no. Hey, man, this real talk. So now you say what you
real
need.
talk, John.
Now you ain't got to. Don't apologize.
I'm
for
just
being
saying
rude.
that we got some homework to do.
Yes, we do.
We got to re-fortify ourselves. We got to constitute how we define family life and how we ensure family life, how we protect family life, how we promote family life, how we love family life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's why the culture. I don't know, what are we singing about? What are our lyrics about? What are our videos about? You know, how does that instill? I was so thankful what Rihanna just did when she announced she was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
She did it in a very eloquent way, you know, a very Afrocentric way. You know, and sister's a good entrepreneur,
Right.
You know, as well as a talent.
Mm-hmm.
But she now understands she's about to be a mother. She's about to be a queen mother. You know, that's instructive to how we rebuild the black family.
Yeah. Another question.
Yes. Lots of young Black youth, millennials, Gen Z, we are angry and upset from the images that we're seeing in media that is not our own. How did you turn all that adversity into progress?
Thank you. Well, it's okay to be angry. In fact, we have a lot to be angry about, but it's a question what do we do with our anger?
Yeah.
I'm very concerned and I'm seeing signs that we are internalizing our anger rather than letting that anger go.
Yeah.
Stress will take you out of here.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we need to, particularly our young people, there's a lot of weight on young people today that we didn't have when we were younger, Jeff. You know, just the whole thought of social media, the whole thought of getting isolated, where you have to depend on people you don't even know to give you a word of support or either a word of condemnation. And so there's a lot of player hating. And just kind of break it down.
Yeah. That's real.
So beware of the player haters.
Yeah.
Don't become one.
Oh, they out there.
Right.
They watching this show right now.
Okay. All right. Okay.
All right, another question.
Next question. Even the Houston Forward Times has seen backlash from different controversial stories. You were around when all the groundbreaking, pivotal stories came out. What is some of the most impactful or harsh backlash you've seen against the Black press for speaking our stories?
Yeah, there have been the Black press over the last 195 years. The Black press has been dynamited, has been bombed, has been firebombed. A lot of tragedies, but the resilience, and that's why I think about family is so important. I'm gonna go back to the theme: Black family, Black church, Black press, how we all work together. And most of our strongest Black press today are family oriented.
Yeah.
A succession, because they not only know something about the past, but they've taken that learning from the past and applied it to this current situation and making opportunities.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the Black press has a great future in 2022. But we also got some challenges.
Yeah.
And so another backlash I've seen with the Black press is that the mainstream press is questioning, well, why do you need Black newspapers now?
Yeah.
You know, well, why do you need HBCUs now?
Yeah.
And some will say, well, why y'all don't need the Black church? Don't go to these other churches.
Why you gotta call yourself Black?
That's right. Well, that's
Just
right.
American.
That's right. And so Ralph Ellison wrote this book, The Invisible Man.
Yes.
And I'm afraid if we're not careful, we're going to become the invisible race.
Wow. Ooh. Say it ain't so.
Hey.
Well, before we get back to other questions, I do want to segue real quick. We talk about young people, and you talk about the current reality. You mentioned Rihanna, and you mentioned entertainment, and you were instrumental in founding the Hip Hop Summit along with Russell Simmons, CEO, entrepreneur extraordinaire, of course, hip hop mogul, and he was very instrumental in the rise of hip hop in the community.
Well, I know a little something about Jay Boney also.
Well, I ain't gonna spit no bars right now. I'm gonna say that for the RTJs, but I appreciate you getting involved, being with your history in the civil rights movement and working with the young people, the hip hop community at that time to form something that was instrumental to galvanize those individuals in the hip hop community who have such influence, particularly connecting and touching those in the streets. Right. You know what I'm saying? So
but that's the story there, bro. The evolution of that is that during the 1980s, or early 1980s, remember I got out of prison early 1980s.
Yeah.
Hip hop was just emerging out of the South Bronx. You know, and what was going on in the South Bronx in the late 70s, early 80s? You know, poverty, police brutality, homelessness, a lot of devastation in the housing units. But it was in their crucible, and it was a crucible, that the art form started to emerge. And a lot of my generation in the civil rights movement, they were very critical of hip hop.
Yeah.
They were even trying to censor hip hop.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was with Russell Simmons and Def Jam Records first got started. I became an advocate because I saw in these young brothers and sisters what I had seen a generation earlier. See, to me, hip hop didn't fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
It emerged out of the cultural manifestation of what we were dealing with in the inner cities, but also around the world. The reason why hip hop today in 2022 is the largest global cultural phenomenon in the world today. How did that become possible? It was because it was authentic, because it was real, and it engaged young people in their creativity, the dance, the graffiti, the art form, the MC, you know,
Breakdance.
the breakdance, and then the lyrics. You know, I mean, in most bookstores in the Black community in Harlem and in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, all of the books that were selling out were dictionaries and thesauruses, poetry books. So what I'm linking is that one of the good things about studying Black history, you see the evolution. Because see, out of hip hop, I still see the blues. Out of hip hop, I still see jazz. Out of hip hop, I still see R&B. Out of hip hop, I still hear echo of the Motown sound. So, but you got to see that connection. So in 1970s, on my way to Wilmington, when Young Church of Christ sent me to Wilmington, I was listening to Marvin Gaye. What's going on? It's a contradiction of the Vietnam War. The cities had just gone up in flames after the assassination of Dr. King. Marvin Gaye was talking about what's going on, you know, and the responsibility of lyricists and music. So when hip hop really started flowering, I became an early defender. And let me tell you who was on my staff at the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. Sister named Sister Soldier.
Sister Soldier.
Lisa Williams.
Yeah.
You know, and by that time, you know, when Clinton came out against Sister Soldier, I defended Sister Soldier. The mayor of New Jersey right now, Roz Baraka, was on my staff.
Wow.
The young boy.
Love Roz Baraka.
Yeah. And some of the editors of what became Vibe magazine and the Source magazine. The first office of the Hip Hop Summit was inside the Source magazine. So I'm watching people battle to get their mics in the Source magazine.
Yeah. 5 mics. Trying to get the 5 mics.
And quite frankly, well, the truth is, I had to wear a bulletproof vest up in the Source magazine. Because people were taking this thing very
Real
seriously.
serious,
But I became a defender because when they have the Source Awards in Miami, I'll be down there, you know, making sure that trying to keep a lid on things and doesn't explode. So, but what happens is hip hop is evolving. You know, and I there's this thing I think I said to you before we came on air. There's no such thing as an unconscious rapper, because some people say, well, these rappers are conscious. You know, Talib Kweli and Nas, they're conscious rappers. These other rappers are gangsters rappers. They're not no, they're conscious. They're just conscious about being a gangster.
Yeah.
They're not conscious about. I mean, it's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, consciousness changed.
It's the environment.
Right, but I'm in the Dipset. I'm in Jim Jones.
Right.
You know, who's a gangster rapper? I'm in fact, I've helped introduce most of Jim Jones' albums.
Okay.
You know, because I think that there should be a connection between what we were doing in the civil rights movement and what happened with the Hip Hop Summit. You know, and this is what I was trying to convince some of my civil rights leaders, because they were trying to tamp down hip hop. I said, oh no, you can't tamp down. You know, y'all ever heard of Gil Scott Heron?
Yeah.
And my man was a forerunner. He was a lyricist, you know, but he was a musician also that knew the bridge between the rising tide of the thinking and the creativity of our young people. That's why today, Joe, I think the Generation Z today, the millennials today, they're the most gifted, they're the most talented, they're the most genius brothers and sisters that we've ever been able to witness. But they need to be told that. They need to be made aware of what God has blessed them with. Some see them as a cursed generation. I see them as the blessed generation.
So let's man, I told you we can talk forever.
Yeah.
Let's
And
talk
that's
about.
why I agreed to be in the movie Belly.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Let's talk about my movie.
That transition.
Let's talk about Belly,
That's
man.
1999.
Let's talk
That's Hype
about
Williams' first movie,
Yeah,
first full-length movie.
yeah,
And if you saw how he did the videography, it was shot like a video.
yeah.
It was shot like
A music video.
An hour, 20-minute video.
Yeah.
It was a storyline, but it was shot like the cinematography at the beginning. That blue,
Yeah.
everybody's eyes
Yeah.
I mean,
Love that,
that
man.
was classic.
Classic.
That was classic. And then, quite frankly, they were looking for somebody to play the role. And keep in mind now what I say: Black church, Black family, Black press. So they were looking around Harlem trying to find somebody to ask me. I said, I'm glad to do it. I had to learn the script in about 3 days. That scene in Belly was actually filmed in Reverend Ike's church in New York, in Harlem.
Wow.
180th Street and Broadway.
Yeah.
And DMX and I.
Did you get a prayer club?
No.
Okay,
I didn't get a prayer club. But one thing I did in light of some of these things going on in Hollywood, I made sure there was no bullets in that gun.
I know, right?
Because DMX, we became close friends as a result of that. Because, Hype and the instruction was, because when you're on a movie set, they have people who are giving you instructions how to inflect and what Hype said to both DMX and look, he's going to kill you. And you have to talk him out of killing you. But in talking him out of killing you, you're just not talking to him. You're talking to young people across the country. And so that's where the words came from. That's where the passion came from. So, and I'm pleased to tell you, we did that in one take. There was no rehearsal over and over. That was straight from the heart.
Yeah, one take.
One take.
One hit wonder.
Wow.
Boom.
Well, that's what we're not rehearsing this. This is the real junkie.
Right.
So what I'm saying is and I think sometimes we underestimate our spontaneity. What's authentic about being spontaneous? If you are fighting for freedom, justice, and equality, you're always on time.
Yeah.
You're not late. You're always on time.
Yeah.
And people will detect whether or not what you're saying is authentic, because when you're on time, it resonates. It doesn't stand still.
Right.
It like reverberates, if I could use a
Yeah.
musical term. And what is the reverberation going on now in Black America? That's our job. We got to play the right note at the right time with the right beat. Sometimes it's 4/4, sometimes it's 3/4 beat, but you got to get it.
Yeah.
That's what made DMX so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a living, not just music machine, it was a culture machine, articulating, spitting, staccato, time, and rhythm with truth.
Yeah. Got some more questions in the audience, man. This is a great conversation.
We have 4 questions. Jeff, keep us on pace.
Yeah,
So we have
let's
time.
go.
First question is hip hop.
You good, Dr.
I'm
Chavis?
good.
All
I'm
right,
good.
let's go.
I'm good.
Hip
It's
hop
fall
is
times. I'm good.
All right, that's good.
hip hop is. You just painted hip hop as a very beautiful expression in whatever form, whether it's cinema, whether it's lyrical. Why so often is hip hop by other people painted as the villain, as harsh, as heavy, scrutinized so often? Why are we so scrutinized when you just made it a very beautiful cultural expression?
Thank you very much. That's a very important question. And important questions deserve an important answer. The truth is, the reason why hip hop is vilified, because hip hop is feared.
I'm sorry, can we drop the mic?
There are 5 mics.
Why do you say it is fear?
Because hip hop is Remember, I said early on, there's nothing more powerful than self-expression.
Yes, sir.
And when the self-expression comes from the crucible of our young people, there's no stopping that now.
Mhm.
And it connects with the vibe of brothers and sisters all over the world, different languages. Man, I went to Hong Kong. I saw Chinese with dreadlocks doing breakdance on the 1 and 2s. They're identifying with the culture of African people. And then the Chinese did a research, genetic research of their origin. Most people don't know the Chinese affirm their African ancestry.
They do.
Yeah.
And we don't even
And
affirm our own
we over
African
here,
ancestry.
we over here arguing critical race theory.
Right. But black people don't even affirm their African
That's-
history.
but that's a lie because we've been socialized. We've been miseducated. Well, we've been tampered with. Our consciousness has been tampered with, but it's not permanent. So that's the thing.
Mhm.
People can regain their true self. People can realign,
Mm.
you know, and that's why the answer to the question that people fear the transformative quality and nature and character of hip hop.
Yeah.
Because it transforms you.
Yeah.
You know, I know some gangster rappers who are now gospel rappers. How did that happen?
Mm. Amen.
It's a transformation.
Another question from the audience.
How is it possible that imperfect people like the late great DMX are able to be people, to be broken, but also to be such vivid storytellers?
Well, I think part of our narrative is that we transcend our brokenness, but you have to sometimes affirm your brokenness. One of the concerns I have today, Jeff, and I know you're writing an article about mental health and the rise of suicides in our community. You know, decades ago, you couldn't pay somebody to commit suicide. Now, people see that as an option. Why? And that's because we have so many influences in our lives. And a lot of these influences, Jeff, are external to who we are. I was talking to Bishop Dixon here in Houston about the identity crisis that we are facing. I'm talking about Black Americans facing an identity crisis. But a crisis also has a solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something insurmountable. We can turn this around. And I'm hoping that out of Texas, of all places, Texas is the most state with the most voter suppression.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Out of
The
this,
trendsetter.
Yeah, out of this can also come the movement to beat back that suppression.
Yes.
Not just reacting, but proactively saying, no, you can't take away what God has given me.
Yes.
It's something not only called a civil right, it's something called a human right. A human right comes from God. It is not legislated by the Texas legislature.
Right.
You know, people have a human right to be able to express themselves. You have a human right to be able to say, no, these are my interests. These are my values.
Yeah.
These are my issues.
Or this is who I want to represent.
That's right. And if you're not representing me, see, to me, we need to talk about not who to put in office.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk about who to take out of office.
Hello.
We got to take some people out.
Hello, lights.
Now I'm talking now loud. I'm talking politically.
Like they say in the
But
church, hello, lights.
We got to take people out.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question. You spoke earlier about different states trying to suppress the voice, the education. A lot of the red states currently are taking a lot of our Black history out of the history books as if it didn't happen. What can Gen Z and millennials, what can we do in application to fight against keeping our education in our schools?
That's another very good question. I think Generation Z and millennials should fight hard, should fight with every breath, not to have the school system to deny you the truth. That's what we're asking for, is the truth. We're not asking for partiality. We're asking for the truth. And quite frankly, white kids need the truth too. because they don't need to be miseducated.
Yeah.
No one is born a white supremacist.
Mm.
No one is born with racial hatred. That's part of the social conditioning.
Yeah.
That's part of the miseducation. And so I think we have to turn all that around. But I'll also say to Black millennials and Black Generation Z, Generation Z, I think that you should embody your culture while you're young. You know, they even trying to tell some brothers and sisters now they can't wear dreadlocks, they can't wear afros. Why? Why all of a sudden our hairstyle is also a fear?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's part of a systematic. When we talk about systemic racism, it not only just takes place in the courtroom or in the prison system, but it takes place in the classroom.
Yes.
It takes place in the kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know some kids in pre-K get expelled from pre-K. How do you get expelled from pre-K? And then that follows you the rest of your, there's a tracking system. There's a segregation system. A lot of our young people are disproportionate put into special education.
Yeah.
Or put into, they're hyperactive. So let's give them some Thorazine and some Polizin. Let's give them some drugs. And then they get addicted to these drugs at an early age. And you wonder why so many people are addicted to drugs today.
Yeah.
So it's part of that systematic oppression. So I want to encourage our Generation Z. I want to encourage our millennials. People say, well, stay woke. I think they're already woke.
Yeah.
But the question is, in our wokeness, in our wakeness, what is we going to do?
Yeah.
And I think that 2022 is the year to do something.
Yeah.
And believe me, if we have the record turnout of Blacks and Latinos in Texas, it's just not going to be a purple state or become a blue state. It's going to become a new reality.
Huh.
Because if you change Texas, you change America.
You change America.
And that's what I'm going to be
As Texas goes, so does the rest
I'm
of the
spending some time down here.
Yeah, there you go.
I've already talked to Bishop Dixon about it and Karen about it in forward times. I think we need to build something here in Texas that can be replicated all over the United States.
Yeah.
2022 is payback year. 2022 is freedom, justice, and equality year.
Yeah.
2022 is making sure our kids get an education. And education starts at home before it gets to the classroom.
Yeah.
A lot of our churches, we need great sermons, but we also need education.
Hello. Two more questions
Two
from
more
the audience,
questions.
I think. Let's go.
The Hip Hop Summit has transformed life all across the U.S. Anyone who is pivotal in hip hop has graced the stage. Can you reflect on one of the most impactful moments of the Hip Hop Summit that you bear witness to?
Oh wow, there's been so many. From 2001 to 2008, we held over 80 hip hop summits in the United States, in Canada, and in South Africa. And that's a difficult question to pick one moment. But I remember when we were in South Africa, we had a hip hop summit in Johannesburg. Mandela was out of prison then. What happened was the youth of Soweto, they have a subset of hip hop is called Kwaito. And in the summit, we were talking about the evolution of hip hop culture. But what struck me most was in the nation of Mandela, there were a lot of young people who felt disconnected from the progress of the movement. And why am I bringing it up? I think our young people today shouldn't just witness leaders speaking and talking in their behalf. Our young people today need to be the leaders speaking and talking in their behalf.
Yes.
And then those of us who are elders, we need to make more spaces. We need to make more room. We need to elevate and amplify the voices of our youth.
Yeah.
Because if you amplify the voices of our youth, you amplify the voice of our future.
Yeah. Great answer. One more audience question, and we're gonna get back into some conversation before we close out. Go ahead.
In your 5 years journeying with Dr. Martin Luther King, what is one of the most memorable lessons that you learned firsthand?
I learned a lesson of humility. Dr. King is going to speak in Raleigh, North Carolina. I think it was in around 1965, 1966. My job, being the youth coordinator, I'm putting up signs. You know, we didn't have no iPhones back in those days on social media.
Yeah.
So I'm putting up posters
Yeah.
about Dr. King's speech. And all of a sudden, these line of cars pull up. Dr. King is in the car. He gets out. He comes over. He says, doing a pretty good job here. And he says, he speaks to me. He says, you have an extra hammer and some nails? And I said, well, Dr. King, I got this. And then you know what he said? He put his hand on my shoulder and said, son, a leader never asks a follower to do something that the leader is not willing to do.
Wow.
He got a hammer and nail and joined me putting up the signs.
Yeah.
It taught me a lesson about leadership.
Yeah.
And from that moment, from that day on to this day, I never asked somebody to do, I'm at the NMPA. I never asked those staff to do something that I was not willing to do myself.
Yeah. You know, Dr. Chavis, you know, this has been an enlightening conversation, and I know eventually here it has to end, but, you know, I know you travel, you know, all over the place. I have as well, but I think one of the most memorable moments for me, life-changing moments for me, was when you and I were in Ile-Ife, Nigeria.
Yes.
And we were there in Africa. And that was my first time to Africa. I had been other places, other countries and continents, but never had been to Africa. And my first trip to Africa couldn't have been any better because it was in the city where they call it the cradle of civilization.
That's right.
Ile-Ife. And we met with we were guests of the Oni of Ife, who is considered the king of the Yoruba people as well as a deity. And I think the thing that stood out to me about that trip is I saw everybody looking like us.
Yes.
You know, black skin, you know, regardless of their socioeconomic status, there was a mutual respect and love and appreciation for being black.
That's right.
Just being black. And it was no less than feeling. You know, I felt, matter of fact, I felt like I finally knew what it meant to be black, having gone over there and listening to the Oni. You know, his words were, when I asked him about our people, what message, you know, he was like, you know, basically like, you know, forgive yourself, you know, like, because we were not embracing our African, you know, heritage and where we were from. And so as you think about that experience, as well as where we are here in this country, you know, what message do you have for Black America right now? Those of us of, you know, with, you know, from the African descent.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned our trip to Nigeria, Jeff. It was a great experience. And I'm glad that on your first trip to Africa, you had that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people go to Africa just as tourists and, you know, get trinkets here and there and come back. But you had a in-depth experience of centuries of Africa. Keep in mind, the Oni of Ile-Ife can trace his ancestry back millennials before Christ, 5,000 years BC, not AD, BC.
Right.
So to be in that part of Africa and to fast forward to where we are in 2022, my message to Black America is a message from the Black press of America. We're a blessed people. We're not a cursed people. There are more opportunities for us today than ever before. However, we are in need of greater unity among us. We need to come out of our silos. We are come out of our separateness. We need to come out of our isolation. We need to come out of our alienation. I'm talking about to one another as a people. So my message is of unity, of self-love, of self-care, and I mean extending our embrace, that we embrace everybody in our community. I think that 2022 becomes a great opportunity for us to reassert who we are as a people, not just in America, but a people in the world. And I believe that the fights that we got to have around voting rights here in Texas, we're going to wind up doing much more than the opponents of our people consider. Quite frankly, Jeff, I think sometimes we should not necessarily announce to the enemy what our plan is. I think sometimes you have to huddle,
Right.
call the play,
Yeah.
and then go out and win the game.
Yeah. Well, it's time to win. I mean, and I know that with you being the civil rights icon that you are, and one who is willing to lead by example and not do something that you instruct other people to do, but actually get in there and do it yourself as well. You know, coupled with the fact that you're leading the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the Black Press of America,
Yes.
200 plus black newspapers across these United States. I think that we got a lot of winning to do.
Absolutely.
And we can do that together. I just want to close with this. Speaking of the NNPA and the Black press, and there's a lot of subject matters and issues that we need to discuss. I mean, as a people, collectively. You talked about collective unity. It's one of the things that I wrote in my book. My new book is here, y'all. I told you it was coming. Don't argue with me. Don't argue with me. It's here. But we're gonna make sure that we're gonna have a book launch announcement soon. But I talk about collective unity in the book, and the fact that we suffer for the lack of that collective unity and getting things done. There's issues around missing Black women,
Yes.
kids, boys, girls. There's issues, of course, still of interracial violence amongst ourselves, murders. There's a huge issue surrounding, aggravated assaults and crime. Young people getting killed. Stray bullets, and it's not like it was back in the day where you could throw these hands at each other, and it be dealt with that way. People are pulling weapons, AKs and knives and guns and just taking that route. But there's also other things. You talked about mass incarceration, but also people that are convicted for crimes. We need to get rid of mandatory minimum sentence.
Yes.
But it takes a collective voice to say that this is the issue. Why should someone serve 30 years, 23 years in prison for a crime they didn't commit, and we act like it's just par for the course?
Sorry.
These are issues that the Black press and we as Black people must address and speak up and out about. And I think that with your leadership and with the help of the Black press, the Black church, and the Black family, we could do that.
Absolutely.
Closing thoughts.
Well, I agree with you, Jeff. I think collective unity, I see it as concentric circles. I think that we engender unity by exhibiting unity. In other words, we're never going to get everybody all unified at first, but we get a core, and that core expands, and that core expands, and that core expands. And as we expand, we make more and more room, particularly for our young people. I'm hoping that the meeting that Bishop Dixon is going to be calling for Black leaders from all walks of life, including fraternities and sororities, will encompass also young people. One of my greatest moments at the NAACP was in June of 1994. We held the first National African American Leadership Summit. I got myself in a little hot water for inviting Minister Farrakhan to the meeting. But if we're gonna have a meeting of all national black leaders, you gotta have a meeting of all national black leaders.
You definitely can't
Okay.
exclude him.
Right.
Yeah, you definitely can't.
But you know, and that was my attitude. And it was a great 3-day meeting. But we also had all my youth leaders at the end of at the table, because I wanted them to see. I wanted them to feel, and we needed their input. Because see, the elders have wisdom, no question. But the young people got that vitality, that energy, that foresight. See, elders have insight. Young people have foresight. And you have that collective insight and foresight in the same place at the same time. God is present.
Yeah. Dr. Chavis, you are a national, an international icon. We appreciate you. We love you. We believe in giving people their roses. I believe in giving people their roses while they can smell them. And we definitely want to tell you how much we cherish you and your contribution to our communities, to our nation, to our people. And we really, really are excited about not only the work you've done, but the work you will continue to do, you know, for the next 100 years.
All right.
You know, so got the business to everybody. All right, y'all, that'll do it, man. You know, we went a little extra time, but I think deservedly so, man. We're excited here to be a part of Real Talk Junkies Live 2022 edition. This new season,
Yes.
Got the production team in the building. Everybody, we ready to go. Listen, man, make sure you tune in every Wednesday, 12 noon Central Standard Time. Real Talk Junkies with yours truly, Jeffrey L. Boney. Real Talk. Don't argue with me. The book is here. It ain't just on the way anymore. It's here, and we're gonna make sure that you guys get that in your hands real soon. Thank you so much. We'll have you back on the show, I know, for future shows.
Looking forward to it.
And God bless you, everybody. We're out.